Never forget, it's all about the lowest common denominator, which is the guy in the ditch. Your whole reason for living is that guy in the ditch who's bleeding out. The Chinook fleet had just gone to war, and I just couldn't wait to go and get amongst it. This is going to be interesting if we're fitting these weapons. Deployed when I was 21. I was the youngest aircrew to go to Iraq at the time. You know all the rules and you know how to bend them when someone's shooting at you.
Right, let's talk little Liz.
Yeah.
Yeah, back in the day, back in when you was at school and all that sort of stuff. Good childhood.
Yeah, no, I am obviously from Northern Ireland, if anyone hasn't figured that out by now. And yeah, I went to a grammar school, which was very much a case of...
You was a clever kid.
Well, I don't know about that. It was kind of the biggest school in the area. And I was a bit of a country bumpkin as well. But, it was the kind of school where you had to go to university, you had to fill in a UCAS form, you had to go off to uni. And quite early on, I realised that I didn't really want to do that. I didn't want to just go to uni and get a degree for the sake of it. So I started looking at other stuff in terms of career. And my brother was mad keen in the army. So he ended up going up to a place called Palace Barracks. You might be familiar with it, back in Northern Ireland. Yeah. And he was going up to do his barb test to join the army.
Yeah.
And I went with him as his little sister. I thought I'd go and give him some moral support. And when he went in to do his exam, there was a magazine on the table and it had a picture of a helicopter and a guy hanging out the side of the helicopter on what I thought was a piece of rope. And I said to the guy in uniform, what's this job? This job looks really cool, the guy on the rope. And he said, well, for starters, it's a wire. And the job title is helicarrier crewman. And I remember thinking at the time, that's so cool. That is the job I want to do.
Really?
So I asked a few more questions about it, got accepted to do an interview, and then basically had to go over to England to do my aptitude test and whatnot. But I remember the whole time doing that, basically at school saying, well, that's me wrapped. I was doing A-levels at the time and kind of rapped on them a bit because I thought, well, this is what I want to do instead.
Because I'm doing that now.
Yeah. And many years later, I was lucky enough to take a Chinook into my old school to the rugby pitches when I was over there doing some tasking. And I remember sitting there, all the teachers had said, oh, you'll never make anything of your life if you don't go to university. And they're all suddenly wanting to look around my Chinook. And it was really good because it was a good advertisement for the kids there to say you don't actually have to have a degree.
That's a very good point you make there, right? Because I was quite clever, but academically, I just didn't want to know. Maths and English, when am I going to use that? Do you know what I mean? So, other kids can look at what I've done, what you've done, and go, actually, I can have a really decent life. And if I don't get those A-levels, who cares? Yeah,
exactly. And, that's where, if I'd have looked at that magazine at the time and gone, well, I've never been in a helicopter before. There's absolutely no way I could ever do that job. That classic imposter syndrome. Then I never would have, even tried. But the point I think I like to try and tell kids now when I do talks is that anything is possible, as long as you're a sponge. And that's the best thing about the forces is they take people in and they train them. They don't expect me to be operating a Chinook in Afghanistan, firing a minigun on day one of being in the Air Force. That's a long journey to get to that point. And I think for anyone looking at a forces career, as long as you're a sponge and you're willing to work hard and take it all in, you'll always have a really good career.
It's that old classic, isn't it? You'll get out what you put in.
Yeah.
And you quite literally will, won't you?
Yeah. I could barely run a mile and a half when I joined the RAF, and by the end of it, I got a lot fitter, obviously. But it was that feeling of everybody wants you to succeed and kind of everyone pulls you through. And I was very, very young, so I was only 19 going through that. And I look back now and think, how the hell did I get through that? But maybe there's an element of naivety. I think if you join the forces young and you're still quite naive, it can play in your favour a bit, because when you're ironing your bed space at 4 o'clock in the morning for an inspection, you just do it. It's like another hoop to jump through, isn't it? And you just want to get through.
Whereas you're 23 years old.
You're big on what am I doing this?
Yeah.
What am I doing this for? Yeah. So that's kind of the naivety I think got me through. And at the end of the 3 months there, you pass out into the sergeant's mess as a sergeant. And again, we were nicknamed plastic sergeants because we'd been in for 5 minutes and we're walking around with that on our shoulders. So spent a little bit more time at Cromwell and just learning a little bit more stuff about how to be aircrew. So a bit about navigation and radios, the ways of the air, that kind of thing. And then I get given a dream sheet, and on that you can pick rotary or fixed wing. Okay. And I'd only ever wanted to go rotary, because on the second time I'd ever been to Palace Barracks to do my interview, I parked my little car in the car park and jumped out to get a car pass, and a Chinook came waxing over the top of me at like 20 feet. I remember looking at the
sound, isn't it? That sound is so distinctive.
Gets you right in the chest. Yeah. And I remember looking at the belly of the aircraft and just going, that is what I want to fly on for the rest of my life. So at Shawbury, it was all very basic stuff, go and pick up really light undersung loads and things like that, and making sure you were, on top of the navigation and a bit of radio communication, but nothing really particularly exciting. And then at the end of that 6 months, you get given another dream sheet. and you get to pick which helicopter you want to go on, which is where it gets interesting. And back in the day, it sounds really old. The RAF still operated Sea Kings, so we still had the search and rescue fleet. We had Pumas, Chinooks, and the Merlins had just come into service.
I was hoping you was going to say Wessexes, and I wouldn't have felt
Oh
so
no,
old.
Wessex went out not long after. It was
I'm
still
feeling old now.
It was still in service then, but nobody was being posted there. It was kind of the dying breed, sadly.
Oh dear.
But I put Chinook for about basically option 1, 2, 3, and 4, and got posted Merlins, and I was absolutely gutted on my role disposal, which involves like a little assault course, lots of beer, and then you get told which aircraft you're going to, and I was posted Merlins. And then about 20 minutes after that, the course leader came over and said, actually, you're being re-rolled immediately because the Merlins were suffering loads of serviceability issues because they'd only just come into service. They were backlogged on all their courses, and the Chinook fleet had just gone to war. We'd just gone to Iraq, and they were crying out for aircrew. So by the skin of my teeth, I got re-rolled.
Lady Luck on the shining down.
Oh yes, oh yeah. There was a lot more beer consumed that night.
When was the first time you actually got on a Chinook and got wheels off?
Yeah, so I was then off. I went to RAF Odeon, which is still the home of the Chinook today, and I was 20 when I arrived, and I had my 21st birthday when I was on the Chinook school. So yeah, 20 years old was my first trip in a Chinook. And you spend 6 months learning how to operate it. I mean, it's a beast, as you know. It can carry 24.5 tons of weight. It can fit a Land Rover trailer, 105 field gun inside, and it's got 3 hooks. So everything that we'd learned at Shawbury on the baby helicopter, we now had to like up our game.
Times 3, basically, isn't
yeah.
it? On everything, at least. So you finished your training there, obviously enjoyed it, loved it.
Yeah.
Did you go straight out on ops after that? Because obviously you were preparing for war, because you've just been told everything's on a war footing, and that's why I'm actually here. So did you go straight out? Well,
I watched the Iraq invasion on a TV at Shawbury, so I was still at Shawbury at that point. And I remember we wheeled a massive TV into the centre of the crew room and watched the invasion of Baghdad, and just couldn't wait to get amongst it. And then, when I eventually got my first squadron, which was 27 Squadron Odeon, I was working up. So you basically arrive at a squadron and you're limited combat ready. So it's basically like having your L plates still on, and you have to work up to be combat ready. And combat ready, I guess, is where you know all the rules and you know how to bend them when someone's shooting at you, and you've got to take off before everything's secured, and you've got to, but you know which rules you can bend safely, and that's essentially when you're combat ready and you're good to go. So I was doing my combat ready workup, and then I deployed to Iraq in 2003. So I was still limited combat ready. I was one of very few people that did that. And it meant that actually my Iraq medal has got aircrew cadet around the edge of it, because I was still non-substantive sergeant. Wow. And, there's only 2 people have got that, me and my mate Logie. But, I remember before I even deployed, seeing all the guys and girls come back and get off the bus outside the squadron in their old desert combats. You remember the ones that were like pajamas? They were really soft, really lovely. I miss those. And, the guys and girls would jump off the bus outside the squadron. They'd be really tanned. They'd come up for a brew before they went on their leave. And they'd have all these war stories, and I just couldn't wait to go and get amongst it. So I did two debts in Iraq. And, it was, I think the lasting memory I have really, I saw a Puma crash out there. There's a Puma crash on my second deployment down there.
They used to do the air bridge, didn't they, the Pumas, across the thing. I've got a picture of I've got some footage of a missile coming past one that I'm in, and the thing going all over. I'm like, honestly. Yeah. And all you could do was laugh, because you're like that. Do you know what I mean? What? It's going down or it's staying up. That's all you got in it. And
I talk about that a lot, and I do talks and stuff around the UK now. And that's the one thing I say a lot, is that we squaddies and just people, forces people in general, are so good at normalising trauma and normalising danger, because it's kind of our bread and butter, isn't it? And you end up you have that dark sense of humour for when you see something pretty traumatic, and you've got this like just laughing sense of humour every time you have a near miss. You're like, and the amount of times you compare, if it had been a foot taller, or if it had been here or not there, if it had been there 5 minutes earlier, I would be dead now. And you can't do that, because you just
you can't pick it to pieces. You just got to accept you're in the Glad to Be Alive club. Yeah. And take it for what it is and have a
glad to be alive. That's a good way to put it. And I so many times people have said, "Oh, you're so brave," and I think you're not. I don't ever feel brave. I feel like when you get shot at, it's like crossing the road and nearly being hit by a car. Yeah. It's kind of over before you know what's even happening a lot of the time. Yeah. So I've been quite lucky in my career. And that's how I kind of knew Afghan was going to be a bit of a beast compared to Iraq. Was before we went to Helmand, we started to fit the miniguns to the aircraft. So that's what we've got, and that's what we always flew with in Helmand. a minigun on the front right and left hand door.
Yeah.
And we had an M60 on the ramp. And the minigun firepower, in the early days, it was 2,000 rounds on one trigger, 4,000 on another. It was higher rate and lower rate. And we used to joke it was for women and children and real badasses, but obviously it wasn't. Obviously it wasn't. And then we combined the trigger, so it's now got one trigger, and that's 3,000 rounds a minute, which is a lot of firepower.
It's a beast, isn't it? It's a beast. I remember getting out to a minigun in Sierra Leone when we did our little job over there, and it's just insane, the noise coming out the side of the helicopters, you know what I mean, for the period of time it gave us cover. It was just, it's
the
immense.
Noise is immense, and we've got 4-bit, so 4-ball and tracer, and that means that if you fire that weapon at night time, it's like something out of Star Wars.
Like, I always liken it to if you put a laser onto one of those glittery balls in a discotheque and it just goes ding.
Absolutely.
That's what it looks like, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's how we kind of knew. That's how I, as a youngster at the time, thought, well, this is going to be interesting if we're fitting these weapons to the aircraft.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what we always had fitted to all of the aircraft in Herrick, whether or not they were holding MERT, and then an M60 at the ramp, which is an old American gun, the same as what they use in the Vietnam War. And because the Chinook is an American aircraft, that's why I get asked this all the time. Was there a dedicated
gunner to that, or was it just anybody could get to it?
No, the other crewman. So number one crewman was the crewman at the ramp. Number two crewman was the crewman at the door. Okay. And we'd swap every day. So you'd get a bit of go on both. Many years later, I was in a bar in Hereford on a Sunday morning having a coffee and reading the papers. And there was an article about this chap in the papers. And I remember just bursting into tears. Like, this is like 8 years later. And my ex at the time said, you know, what was wrong? And I said, I'm just reading this story about this guy. I picked him up, and the name had just stuck with me because it was just such a distinctive name. And here I was reading about, you know, his family and his fiance. So that one was quite hard. And, you know, it wasn't always negative stories. We picked up so many guys who were dead when they came over the ramp and then came back to life at our feet. And that is a testament to, like, the medics that we flew with. They were flying angels.
I mean, the medical advances that were made by those people, especially in sort of like trauma management and bleeds and all that sort of stuff, were phenomenal, weren't they?
Oh, yeah.
And you must have actually seen that progress in the time that you were out there.
Even with the kit that we were carrying, you know, that grew. In the early days in the MERT, there was a little bit of med kit down the back. And then by the end of it, it was literally like an operating theatre, a flying operating theatre. And every single piece of kit had a very distinct place it had to be. So whenever you swapped all that kit onto a different aircraft, every single thing had to go back in exactly the same place. And that's so the medics they knew
that
exactly
technology has actually sort of like come home with you, if you were, because that's what they're using in the ambulances and that now, you know, especially I spoke to a medic the other day who said in some respects, you know, ethically, you're thinking, should you be doing it? Should we be keeping them alive this long anymore? Do you know what I mean? But that's the way it is.
And it brings an interesting point. You know, I remember some of the junior crewmen who would come, because I obviously got kind of, as I went through my career, got to the point where I was an instructor. And one of my last op Herricks, you know, some of the junior guys would come out and they couldn't wait to go on MERT and do that duty, and they couldn't wait to get shot at. And it's the kind of case of be careful what you wish for.
Some of you wants to tell them be careful what you wish for, but the other half you can understand because you were that
was
person.
Me,
you know,
exactly.
I went chasing it. My son's in now.
Yeah.
He's like, well, something's got to happen soon. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like,
and I look back at sort of when I joined a week after 9/11 happened. And I remember watching that on the TV and thinking, that is, the woman beside me, I worked in a little cafe at the time, and she elbowed me and said, you're joining in a week, Liz, you're going to be busy. And never a truer word was said. And I look back at the slice of time that I had in my career. You know, I joined in 2001 and then, you know, had 17 and a half years from then. So because of that time slice, I got my 2 Iraqs, I got my 10 Herricks. And after I left in 2019, they haven't done a lot since then. You know, Mali's been ongoing, and they've done the odd kind of like NEO and relief thing. But in terms of actually going to war and doing what you joined to do,
nothing on the scale of those Herricks. Those Herricks were absolutely crazy, weren't they?
Yeah. So I feel very privileged to be part of that. I certainly feel like, you know, being part of MERT was an honour. To be part of a soldier's last journey off the battlefield is something that, you know, I take a huge amount of comfort in the fact that I was there, that person, carrying them back. And it's definitely shaped me as a person in terms of the way I look at things. I think until you've seen real loss, you don't understand what real love is. You know, I think when you see it in people's eyes when they're
there's so many things. It's a hardship as well. You see hardship on a different level.
Oh yeah.
When you're in places like that. Do you
and
know what
suddenly
I mean?
like a bucket of hot water at the tip of your head. I mean, it's certainly what I've seen in terms of austerity in Herrick was nothing compared to the guys in the FOBs. You know, yes, we had the feeder every night and we had pretty much fresh food every night. And we had showers, ship's routine, but it was still a shower. I've spoken to so many of the lads who were like, yeah, you'd be lucky if you get a shower once a week and it's a hot bottle, it's hot water tipped over your head or whatever.
They didn't moan about it, did they?
No.
They weren't moaning. You weren't moaning about it.
Yeah, I know. I've had more austere conditions in Salisbury Plain, which has been pretty crap sometimes. Some crap 12 by 12 exercises in Salisbury Plain. But you're right. It's a massive leveler being in the forces, isn't it? Because you appreciate the really simple things.
Yeah, and I think, look, normal things, I don't get excited about normal things. You know what I mean? It's, oh, you've missed the bin, man. You've missed the bin, man. Oh,
yeah.
I missed the bin, man.
Yeah.
I'll get him next week.
He'll come next
You
week.
know what I mean? So what? Who cares?
And like simple things, like in the early days, I used to love getting blueies. Do you remember blueies?
Yeah.
But do you remember people wrote them, and then it became e-bluey, and everyone was just emailing them.
Bluey before. I'm telling you.
But, I used to love getting blueies from home, and I used to love when they were handwritten. But I always used to end up trying to open them up, and you always used to rip the first or the last
and it's
line.
Always the most important bit as well. We used
the first to last line.
There's nothing worse than not getting one when everyone else has got one. As well. We used to have a sergeant major used to go, Campion, give that to Jones.
Oh, what a knob. But that's, coming back to what the Chinooks did out there, that ramp that I stood by made a difference every day. And whether or not it was rescuing and saving lives or taking fresh boxes of oranges into the guys who've been on rat packs for 6 months or delivering a letter from Granny, that ramp and us putting that ramp and seeing the guys come to the ramp every day made a difference.
It can make a huge difference morale-wise. You know what I mean? You're saying, Nanny's bluey. Do you know what I mean? Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I decided to take the mid-discharge over the desk job. And then, so I left in 2019. And I remember at the time cracking a bottle of champagne on my last day at home with my ex who's worked at Hereford. And he was getting out at the same time. And we were like toasted at each other and went, how did we get out alive? We've got all of our limbs attached and our brains are still in one piece. And I'd seen so many colleagues fall along the way. Yeah. With PTSD, and yet here I was with 10 Herricks under my belt going, I'm all right here, got away with it. And I thought I had. So 2019 rolled on. I actually ended up going through a pretty messy divorce in the end with the ex, and it was that classic. Both had been in the military for so long. Suddenly we didn't have a common enemy to fight, so it was just much easier to fight each other, things started to unravel. I think when you're both trying to figure out who you are as a person, when you've taken that uniform off, it was, our house turned into a battleground. So we went through a divorce, and then 2020 got locked down. And at that point, I still thought I was okay. I'd kind of been living my best life for 2019. I'd been keeping really busy. I'd been going to the opening of an envelope as long as a free glass of Prosecco. But what I now know in hindsight, looking back, was they were all coping mechanisms. Keeping busy. Running my body into the ground in terms of training, going to the gym like 5 hours a day, just keeping busy so I didn't have to sit at home with my own thoughts. And then 2020 happened, March, we got locked down, and suddenly I had nothing but me and my own thoughts at home. And in the early lockdown, you're only allowed out for like 10 minutes exercise a day. So from someone who'd been running marathons and doing Ironman triathlons and things, it wasn't even worth putting my trainers on for that. So I just stopped training completely. And when you go from one extreme to the other, I was just, totally lacking in routine and purpose. And that's what we as veterans thrive on, isn't it? You spend your whole life in the forces, like basically living on a routine.
Yeah.
And, we'll always fit our little gym into our daily work, don't we? And suddenly that was all gone. And, I'd gone from a job that had so much purpose to like, I can still be in my pajamas at 3:00 watching Netflix because no one gives a shit if I'm up or not. No one cares. And, suddenly little Liz from Basingstoke wasn't making a difference to anyone's day anymore. So I started to unravel as 2020 went on. And I replaced the exercise with sugar. I got really addicted to sugar, and sugar addiction is like cocaine. It's, at one point I was literally eating spoonfuls of honey in the kitchen to try and lift my mood out of the gutter because it was in such a dark place. And the endorphins that I usually would have got from exercise were just not there. So I was trying to eat sort of my way to feeling better. And that just led into a really vicious circle of not wanting to train then because I felt even worse from all the sugar in my body. And then that developed insomnia. And as 2020 went on, my insomnia got worse and worse. And you and I both know sleep deprivation is a form of torture, isn't it, in the military?
Absolutely, yes.
I've done my interrogation course, and it is not good to have no sleep for 5 days. And I think the moment where the red flags were really starting to show, where was one night I was awake at 4:00 in the morning, and I got my logbooks out and started to look up a lot of the soldiers I'd picked up on MERT who hadn't made it home. And coming back to what I said earlier, we never did that when we were on that duty because we knew it was going to be, bad
There's
juju.
a can of worms in there,
Yeah. And yet here I was looking them all up. at 4 in the morning.
On your own?
Yeah, on my own in my house. And I could, I knew that I was in a really bad place at that point, and I could have picked up the phone to any single person. I could have called any of my RAF colleagues who I'd known since day one in the Air Force, because they were all still like family. But I never wanted to be a burden to anyone, especially during lockdown when everyone was going through something. And I think being a female doing my job, even though the lads never ever singled me out to be anything like the weaker sex, or, if I'd have been the girl crying around the back of the tent at the end of a MERT shout, they would never have felt or made me feel like I was weak for doing that. In fact, very often some of the lads would be around the back of the MERT tent having a cry, and I'd go round and take them for a coffee, put my arm around them, do whatever. But I didn't want to be that girl crying, and that was an internal pressure that I put on me.
You put your own pressure on you.
Absolutely.
Sort of like shackled yourself there, haven't you?
And it came from inside, that pressure. And this, whenever I was sat there looking up these guys, I didn't want to reach out and ask for help. So it kind of kept snowballing to the point where in August we had a heat wave, and I hadn't slept for days at this point. So I ended up taking a drug called amitriptyline, which I'd been prescribed for my neck many years before while I was still serving. And amitriptyline's a really good nerve blocker. A lot of amputees are on it. A lot of just the British public are on this drug. It's a really good nerve blocker, and it's an excellent sleeping tablet. It knocks you out. So I ended up taking that on the Sunday night to try and get some sleep of this during this heat wave. Took another one on the Monday. I woke up and I thought, well, that worked because I got a really good night's sleep. So I ended up reordering this amitriptyline online on repeat prescription. Took another one on the Monday, another one on the Tuesday, and I woke up on the Wednesday morning that week, and I honestly felt it was like I'd been body snatched by the Grim Reaper. I woke up that morning and went, I'm going to kill myself tonight. Today's my last day on Earth.
Really, it just flipped over.
Just like that. I was in the departure lounge.
Could you understand why? Did you in your own mind, did you understand why, or was it?
No, it was just, I was so removed from my normal self, because I'm quite gregarious and quite chatty normally, and I was just, no, this is it. Today's the day. So I was really scared. So I ended up phoning the first thing I did was I emailed my doctor, because it's so much easier to put things in writing than actually make that phone call, isn't it? So I emailed my doctor, and I got an email straight away back from the pharmacy, which is actually attached to the doctor's building. And the pharmacy said, the email had been, this is me, I've woken up this morning, I'm feeling suicidal, I'm quite scared, and I think I need some help. And they emailed back and said, you've come through to the pharmacy, you need to contact your doctor. I was like, okay, thanks. So I then phoned the doc, got a lovely lady on the phone, lovely old lady, and I said, this is me, I've woken up this morning, I'm having suicidal thoughts, I'm quite scared. And she said, could you call back tomorrow? So that was a sign of the times for COVID, wasn't it? So I ended up breaking down on the phone to her, and she said, look, okay, we'll get the doctor to call you this afternoon. So he called me about 2 o'clock, and it was just a locum doctor. And at this point, my feelings had been building all morning, and I was really quite distraught at this point. So I, as soon as he phoned, I was just in pieces down the phone saying I wanted to kill myself. And he said, look, I'm going to prescribe you some antidepressants to come and get this afternoon, a drug called sertraline. Take it straight away, but you'll feel worse before you feel better. So that was it. And at no point did he say, do you want to come in and speak to someone? He didn't say, what other medication are you taking, which would have been a really important question to ask. And he also didn't look at my notes to see that I'd reordered amitriptyline on the Monday. So I remember hanging up the phone that day from him and thinking, well, that's it. No one cares.
You must have thought exactly that.
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
I've asked the professionals for help, and even they don't care. So, and that was the moment where throughout that whole day, I almost felt really relieved. I felt like a big weight had been lifted.
The doctor's made your mind up for you, hasn't he? He's like, I'll tell you what.
I was like, I'm done it now. Yeah, that's me. I've tried what I was supposed to do, which was ask for help. They don't care. And it was almost like I've been given the green light to go ahead with my plan. Loads of people ask me all the time, or loads of people share that they've lost someone to suicide and that they feel like they should have said something different or they could have done more. But I look at my day and my story, and suddenly the hardest phone call I've ever had to have was my mum called the hospital whenever I was still in the hospital, and 3 times I had to tell the doctor I wasn't ready to speak to her, because what do you say to your mum after you've tried to kill yourself? And then my little brother, who'd been living with me for a couple of weeks during lockdown, and he'd only just moved out, or because he was just basically keeping in my spare room. He only had left the week before, and he arrived at the hospital and was like just in pieces. He was like, why didn't you say something? What could I have done? And watching his face so broken, in that respect, it certainly hit me, the ripple effect of that, of what my actions had been. But the truth is that anyone who always asks themselves that, like I'm sure you feel like that as well, I think whenever someone's made their mind up, they've made their mind up, and it's really hard.
Yeah,
to
I mean,
spot the signs.
unfortunately, it's something I've come across since years ago in the army.
Yeah.
You know, my first friend did it years and years ago.
Yeah.
And every time there's been a finite thing where they knew they were doing it.
Yeah.
And you never.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I've come across loads of others who've sort of like been found, but the ones who didn't want to be found have been like, they've just gone and done it.
Yeah.
And
it is
wow.
the quiet ones, you know, there's certainly that.
And the same as like
difference.
you said, you researched how many tablets you were going to take. In your own mind, you'd already done it. You said goodbye to everybody. The doctor rubber stamped it for you, and off you trotted like you were gone.
And I think there is a huge, there is certainly those people out there who will make a cry for help. Only recently, I had a chap who messaged me actually on LinkedIn. A guy I didn't know, complete random stranger, is a veteran. And he just messaged me one day on LinkedIn about 3 weeks ago and said, Liz, I'm going to kill myself tonight. Now, I have no training of how to deal with that. But I seemingly over this last 12 months have kind of become this either ambassador or beacon, whatever way you want to put it, of like people, the veterans' mental health. So he reached out to me. So he wouldn't tell me how or what he was planning to do. And I was sort of like in a disarray of, I didn't know anything about this chap. So I ended up looking up on LinkedIn where his company was based. Managed to call his company, still no answer there, but they were further up north than where I live. So I eventually managed to get out of him how he was planning to do it. And he'd booked a hotel and he was on his way to the hotel. So managed to get hold of the police and give them all that information, and then called the local the local police station to the hotel. And it was a veteran guy who was actually answered the phone, who's a copper. And he was brilliant. He said, we'll get there. We'll get hands on him. And I called the hotel as well to warn them. And it was the funniest conversation with the hotel when everyone speaks European and actually you're trying to tell them, no, it's not my booking, but there's a man on his way to your hotel and he's planning to kill himself there tonight. So that was a very odd conversation to have. But the good news was they did get hold of him, and they got, they phoned me back 20 minutes later to tell me that they got him and he was okay. And I remember the overwhelming relief of that, of just going, I don't even know this guy, but just feeling like, they've got him and he's okay. But the fact he'd actually put it out as a very much, I think, a cry for help, and I think he just wanted to speak to someone. He just wanted to be heard and someone to put their arms around him. And the sad fact is that a lot of the time for veterans, that falls to the veterans' charities, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. That's and unfortunately, a lot of people will not reach out at all because they're just too scared to, because it's just, or they think, I just think I'm bluffing. So, Liz, going forwards and from here on, what are you doing? What are you up to?
So obviously when I was going through PTSD counselling, wrote the book. And again, that wrote...
Plug the book. What's the book called? It's
called Chinook Crew Chick, which is a bit of a mouthful. Chinook Crew Chick.
I can't say it. I'm not going to try it. Chinook Crew Chick. Oh, I've done it.
Well, the publishers wanted to call it Chinook Girl. And I was like, I've never been called Chinook Girl in my entire life. But the lads used to call me Chick. Used to get called Doris quite a bit. But
Doris.
Which is a sign of affection. So I never had an issue with that. But yeah, so I wrote that in 3 weeks during my PTSD counselling, because I find writing's quite cathartic. I used to write a lot of poetry.
It's a good way to get stuff off your chest as well, isn't it? Because you're actually going, right, I'll tell you what, there it is, bang.
Yeah, exactly.
There it is.
And the book was never written for anyone to read. The book was written like a verbal diary, just get it out on the laptop, and then it was just kept in a file on my laptop. And it was only about a month or so later, I was walking with a friend and I told her, I said, don't laugh, but I think I've written a book. She was like, well, send me it over and let me have a read. So I did. She's a civvy. She read it. Said this is really good. You should send it to some publishers. So I did, and off it went. And then Pen and Sword published it, and it came out in September, and it sold out overnight. It literally sold out overnight and went to bestseller on Amazon in the military section. I was like, wow, none of which I'd ever expected. So that's kind of catapulted me into the speaking circuit now. So I do a lot of talks, for a lot of big corporate companies, people who not a single person in the room has got any military experience, which I love, because at least I can kind of highlight not just what the Chinook Force did in Helmand, because I'm extremely proud of that, but also those things that all of us veterans suffer whenever we do come out, when we take the uniform off and the music stops, the things that we suffer. And
there's no chair to sit on.
No, exactly.
There's already a civvy on it.
Yeah. And, I think, veterans, because I was a veteran at 37, and combat stress are really good at the minute. They're trying to rebrand what a veteran is, because I think everyone's got that image of like the older guys stood at the side of the cenotaph, which
with
rightly
his blazer
so.
on and his tie and his...
But
it's a bit tired. It looks a bit tired. It's not. It's not in keeping with how we are now.
No, and some veterans could be in their early 20s. Maybe for Helmand, I think most of them are probably pushing towards 30 now if they've done time at Helmand. But they're still young lads, and they will never tell you what they did. They'll never, if they go into a civvy job, they'll just, hide in the background and get on with their life. And I think that's where trying to highlight what a veteran is, they hide amongst you. They are the best asset your company will ever have, but they'll have the worst CV on the table. And it's getting civvies to kind of understand that.
Listen, you've been a phenomenal guest. I hope that you'll come on again as these books start rolling out and as your name gets bigger.
Yeah. Well, the paperback's out in October, and then there's the audiobooks coming out soon as well.
Did you narrate the audiobook?
I did. So you would be safer buying the book because you're going to need subtitles to read it. So you might as well just buy the book. Yeah. So it comes out later on this year. So it would be lovely to come back again.
Brilliant. Yeah. Well, we'd love to have you. You're phenomenal. I'm a massive fan now. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Phil, for having me.
Cheers.